Bev, Andrew, thank you very much, and good morning to you. 2 minutes past 11, the top story today. The Prime Minister's promising that those involved in violent disorder will face the full force of the law after a weekend of unrest across the country. The government's Cobra committee is set to meet this morning to discuss the violence and to see what can be done to make sure that it stops. Police have now detained more than 400 people across the country since disorder broke out. In Middlesbrough alone, officers detained 43 people after protesters were seen chucking burning wheelie bins at police. And overnight in Rotherham and Tamworth, masked anti-immigration protesters hurled wood, chairs and bottles outside a hotel. Our reporter Annie Riley is there for us.
Violence and disorder broke out in a protest made up of around 700 people who targeted this hotel as it was being used to house asylum seekers. Bricks and missiles were thrown, fires were started and the hotel windows were smashed. At least 10 police officers were injured as part of this, and the clean-up effort is continuing.
Anna Riley there, reporting for us earlier. Well, there's now been 6 days of serious disorder following the murder of 3 small children in Southport. The Defence Secretary John Healey has ruled out today putting any army on the streets to keep the peace. But Shadow Home Secretary James Cleverly claims the government's been slow to react.
It was only yesterday afternoon we found out that Keir Starmer was going to cancel his holiday plans. Cobra is only meeting today after many days of violence and disorder. Why did Cobra not meet last week to make the decisions about mutual aid, support for police officers, extra funding, coordination across government departments? The Labour Party have got to get used to the fact they are no longer in opposition. It's not just about what you say, it's about what you do, and they have been slow off the mark.
Well, in other news this morning, we've heard that a major incident has been declared at Queen Alexandra Hospital in Portsmouth after what's been described as an unexpected and a serious loss of power there. The A&E department is now closed to new patients and phone lines are down. Patients with a serious medical condition are being told not to attend the emergency department, and phone lines are still down at this stage. Bosses say services will likely be affected throughout the day. And let's cross now live to South Yorkshire Police as they give a statement in response to the protests over the weekend.
Pushed against the hotel and set on fire, with the clear intent to cause serious harm to the residents and staff. It was known there were people residing and working in the hotel, but the mindless individuals responsible had absolutely no regard for their safety. It was ultimately a disgusting display of thuggery continuing well into the evening, with our policing operation only finishing around 5 a.m. I want to say a heartfelt thanks to all those involved from South Yorkshire Police and the many forces who provided us with mutual aid, our partners in the fire and ambulance service and local partners for their continued support. I would also like to thank those who've already sent kind messages to the force. Officers have worked through the night to begin identifying those involved in these horrendous scenes. Please be assured, if you were there, we will find you, and you will be held accountable for your part in yesterday's violence. To our local communities, and particularly in Manvers, yesterday was a dark day, and we know this was felt across our county. Our priority will always be public safety, and you will see an increase of officers across South Yorkshire over the coming weeks. Finally, we will be sharing a link for anyone with footage from yesterday that they wish to share with us. Alternatively, you can report any information anonymously via Crime Stoppers. Thank you.
Do you think you were caught out by the scale of the violence? Why didn't you?
Well, that wasn't exactly a press conference. That was a statement from Lindsay Butterfield, who's a senior officer in South Yorkshire Police. We're going to go straight now to Jack Carson, who is our reporter in Southport, of course, because it's exactly 1 week since those 3 little girls were stabbed to death. Jack. He's not there.
Now, hasn't it,
yes,
since that... yeah, it's obviously been a week since that horrific and tragic incident here in Southport, and the flowers here remain and continue to be coming in their hundreds, in their thousands. I mean, this is just obviously one location just outside of Southport here, and they've been put in these temporary buckets, and because of how many flowers quite simply are still being brought here to, of course, to mourn these three girls, 6-year-old Bebby King, Elsie Dot Stankham, who was of course 7 years old, and 9-year-old Alice De Silva Aguiar. Of course, those other children were in critical condition in hospital after the attack, and of course 2 of the people who were taking charge of that Taylor Swift dance class as well, of course. And we've been speaking to people here this morning, reflecting on, of course, a week on, and it's amazing how raw the grief still is here in the community. Outside the town hall in the town centre, there's another, just like this, where the flowers are here. There's another, rows of buckets and circled and around the front of the town hall, and people just coming to just kind of have a moment there. One lady we spoke to who was there, walking around the flowers, just felt like she didn't really know how else to cope with something this tragic. She talked about how this is a small town, this is a small community. Of course, we've heard over the past week, haven't we, about it's a seaside town. People at the moment are coming here for their summer holidays now that the schools have broken up, and yet this place was hit with such a tragic incident with innocent girls trying, of course, to just enjoy themselves and enjoy something that they loved, like Taylor Swift's music and dancing and having fun with their friends, of course. So it's a lot of raw grief really from the community, but what's also been shown over the past week is how much and how quickly this community came together. I mean, the soft toys that have been here, laid at these kind of temporary memorials here on the streets. What they've been done is they've been put in plastic bags to stop them from getting wet in the rain. Some people have actually taken them away as well. So that's just some example of how the communities come together here.
OK, thank you, Jack Carson there. Awful. And it is important to remember that the chaos and the rioting we've seen this weekend all stemmed from the loss for those 3 families of those little girls.
Well, some of them use it as an excuse, of course. Well, in the studio, delighted to say, is Zia Yusuf joins us. He's the chairman of Reform UK. I had the misfortune to get into a bit of a punch-up today with an independent Labour MP. She's lost the whip, Zara Sultana, who says irresponsible politicians like Nigel Farage have caused a lot of the problem by questioning, quotes, whether the truth is being withheld from us. What do you say to that, Zia?
I think the devastating scenes that we are seeing around the country, and let's be really clear, they are devastating. I think a lot of people in this country feel deeply, deeply unsafe. I think it is down to irresponsible politicians. I think it's down to 14 years of Conservative rule, where they've exploded the size of the population, failed to ensure, well, you couldn't possibly assimilate so many people, such a vast number, almost 2 million in the last 3 years alone. That meant assimilation hasn't happened. And on top of that,
quarter of the population of London.
These are staggering numbers over the last decade. And then on top of that, whenever anyone, including Nigel, stands up and says, can we have a serious conversation about this, please, because we are headed to a very dark place. I mean, that's what I wrote in the Telegraph earlier this year. One of the reasons I came into politics was because I could see we were heading to a very dark place as we exploded the size of the population. And anytime somebody tries to ask perfectly legitimate questions, hardworking people in Britain ask perfectly legitimate questions about the numbers coming, about assimilation, about infrastructure, not only are they not listened to, they are insulted, their lives are destroyed, they are dehumanised. This has been systematic. And now, by the way, we have a Labour government. Keir Starmer's been in charge for a month. He's always looking for scapegoats for his party's absolutely appalling performance. I mean, if you look at what he's done inside the month that he has been in power, they've changed the word illegal migration to irregular migration. He announced an amnesty for tens of thousands of people who had come here illegally, knowingly come here illegally by boat. He has announced that they're going to release tens of thousands of criminals out of our jails. they completely failed to make clear that police were off limits at the Hare Hills riots, where a police car was upturned and a bus set ablaze. On top of that, we saw, again, the two-tiered policing. If you look at what happened in Manchester Airport, where a female police officer had her face smashed in. Those assailants are currently out on bail. Totally different approach. Totally different approach to the way he's talking about, quite rightly, by the way, dealing with the hooligans over the weekend.
Like you're excusing this behaviour. Just respond to that accusation.
For the avoidance of doubt, myself and the Reform Party condemn in the strongest possible terms the violence, the thuggery, the threat to life, the menace that we have seen over the last few days. We can't make that any clearer than we have. However, the way that the Labour government, and frankly most of the Conservative Party, you've seen the comments from Priti Patel this morning. I mean, this should tell you that in order to actually win the Conservative leadership, I think the country needs to know this, because we are reconstituting the centre-right politics at Reform. People need to understand, in order to actually win the Conservative leadership, you actually do have to sign up to open borders. You have to sign up to the idea that working people in Britain essentially don't get a say in how their country is run, how many people get to come here.
Well, look, you've talked about the 2 million that have come into this country in 2 years.
3 years.
3 years. What would Reform do?
Well, what we would do is, number one, we would stop the illegal boats. You know, but
that's a small beer, frankly.
Well, let's be clear. Those are people.
But it's small beer, isn't it? 70,000 a year.
In comparison to the enormous numbers that are coming here legally, yes. But let's be clear about something. These are people about whom we know nothing. They're 80% male, and we know almost nothing about them. So when you're talking about national security, and when you're talking about potentially violent crime, and by the way, these are people who are being trafficked by illegal gangs, right? So it is a real problem. It's an affront to hard-working British people. There's no civilized country in the world where the populace are consistently told that having a secure border is beyond us. We spend £50 billion on defence every single year. That is hard-working British people's taxpayers' money that is spent on that. By the way, I forgot to mention another thing Labour did was dissolve the Rwanda programme, which, as much as it was a bit of a boneheaded programme, that had been paid £230 billion.
Your party is very critical of that policy.
Absolutely, but we're practical. Unfortunately, for all of us, Rishi Sunak paid the Rwandan government £230 million of our money up front for it. So there's no point in scrapping it, other than if you actually wanted to increase the numbers coming here illegally.
What worries me, and I'd lots of GB News viewers as well, is where this goes next. And what I mean by that is not more riots, because normally these thugs will burn themselves out over a few weeks. They go back and do something else, and hopefully they get banged up. Is what the Labour government use this for, how they weaponise this disruption in order to clamp down on the civil liberties of everybody. Do you share that worry?
Well, we're seeing it. We're seeing it happen in real time. I mean, Keir Starmer's response in the speech he gave a few days ago was to announce essentially some sort of RoboCop policing, again, for a very specific group. Now, again, I just want to reiterate, for the avoidance of doubt, violence in all of its forms we condemn, and those people should absolutely face the full force of the law. However, it seems to be that the response by Keir Starmer's government and the Home Secretary in particular, is totally different depending on the demographic who are committing the crimes. And the British people are smart. They can see that. And so, yes, we are deeply concerned about civil liberties. Keir Starmer has demonstrated herself to be deeply authoritarian. And by the way, I would reiterate the point. Labour and the Conservative Party want to silence Nigel Farage, who is simply asking perfectly valid questions on behalf of the British people.
A lot of people watching won't know you, Zia. You're the chairman of Reform UK. You're relatively new to politics. I know you had a stellar career in the city, then you set up your very successful business. Who are you? Where are you from? Why did you go into become a Reform Party activist?
My parents came to this country in the 1980s, by the way, a time when...
Where did they come from?
So they came from Sri Lanka originally. My father had recently qualified as a doctor. They had to travel all over the country, wherever the work was. They didn't really have much to their name beyond that medical degree. I was born up in Scotland in a little town called Bells Hill. My little sister was born in Cornwall. My elder brother went to 6 different primary schools. Such was the amount of travel my parents had to do to find work. My mother then qualified as a nurse. Between them, they've given half a century of service to our NHS. I'm deeply proud of them. And look, I am an example of the social mobility that has historically been possible in this country. I'm deeply, deeply grateful for this. That's why when I sold my company last year, I thought very hard about doing what I could to serve my country. And a really pivotal moment for me was when Nigel, whom I've known for a decade, I've obviously got nothing but admiration for, announced that he was going to stand at the seat in Clacton. And, you know, when I decided to get involved in politics and at that time make a donation, we should remember Reform was still polling in the single digits, right? It was 50-50 whether he would win a seat, whether even he would win a seat in Clacton. And obviously now we see our movement is stronger than ever. We obviously won 14% of the vote in the general, and I think actually we're headed for much, much greater things.
How well do you think Keir Starmer's doing as Prime Minister, and how long do you think he's going to be in that role?
Well, he has inflicted upon this country the greatest civil unrest that we have seen probably in a decade.
He would say that's not fair. He didn't kill those little girls.
Obviously, that is absolutely correct. However, the buck stops with the executive. That is exactly, as someone who was an executive myself, the reality is that when you're the Prime Minister and you've had a month, and by the way, I just rattled off their achievements in that month, almost all of which were incendiary and actually, I think, intended to goad the hard-working British people with whom he disagrees. And we shouldn't forget, while they got this walloping historic majority in terms of seats, that was an idiosyncratic event of our system. 80% of people eligible to vote for him, 80% of eligible voters in this country did not vote for him, and many of those actively voted against him. And so he and his government are behaving in a deeply authoritarian manner. He has to take responsibility. Of course he's not responsible for those horrific murders. I want to be really clear about that. However, he is the executive of this country. He has reacted every single chance he has had to actually impact the situation in a positive way, which involves listening to the concerns of hard-working British people. He not only has not listened, he has insulted them and goaded them. And for that, I think he has an awful lot to answer for.
Why is he not listening?
And he would probably say you're the hard right. And he's saying the hard right, of course.
Far right.
Well, the response,
right, yeah.
The response of the authoritarian left to anybody who asks legitimate questions of them is to insult them and to launch into ad hominem attacks because they actually can't engage on the issues. I mean, how can you, even if you look at the numbers of people coming here illegally since Keir Starmer took over on a daily rate basis, has gone up.
There's 3 boats crossing the channel as we speak.
So, and again, you know, what's really interesting is we ran on a platform, and our stated policy for solving the migrant crossings problem is to have those boats taken back to France. And during the general election campaign, everybody told us this is ridiculous. You know, the French would do all sorts of things. And what happened? Labour actually took some migrants back to France. France took them back. And for some reason, Labour, so we actually thought as patriots, they might actually be solving the problem and be fully supportive of that course of action. Instead, they presumably realised that worked and decided that was obviously not the thing that they wanted to do and returned illegal crossings back to record numbers again.
OK.
We've got to leave it there, sadly, but you'll come and see us again, I hope.
Absolutely.
Zia Yusuf.
Chairman of Reform UK. Coming up, we're going to have the latest from Starmer's emergency Cobra meeting. What action will he take to tackle the thugs and so-called bring harmony to our streets? Britain's Newsroom on GB News.